The monitor screamed. A long, flat, merciless sound filled the operating theater at Seoul National University Hospital, the sound that every surgeon dreads, the sound that means a human being is slipping past the point of no return. BP is crashing, 70/40 and falling. We're losing him. The surgical team moved like a single panicked organism, hands flying, instruments clattering, voices sharp with fear. On the table lay a man who had once commanded boardrooms, who had moved politicians with a phone call, who had built a hospital empire from the ground up with nothing but ambition and a ruthless refusal to lose. Chairman Baek Dae-jun, the most powerful name in Korean private medicine, was dying on the very kind of table he had spent his life owning. And there was only one surgeon in the building who could stop it. The doors burst open. He walked in the way surgeons walk when they have already decided the outcome, steady, unhurried, every movement deliberate. He pulled on his gloves without looking at his hands. He approached the table. He looked down at the man whose face had haunted him for 7 years. A nurse reached up and removed his mask. The room went still for half a second, one of those strange pauses where even machines seem to hold their breath. Tare Odili was back in Seoul. 7 years earlier, he had been the most invisible person in the city. That was the truth of it. Not invisible in the way that poets mean, not quiet or overlooked. Invisible in the way that only immigrants understand. The kind of invisible where people look directly at you and see a problem to be solved, a question mark, a presence that doesn't belong. Tare had arrived in Seoul on a scholarship so rare his professors back in Port Harcourt had told him it was the kind of thing that happened to other people. But he had studied through blackouts, written applications by candlelight, and sat the entrance exam 3 times until his score was impossible to ignore. Seoul was cold in ways he hadn't expected. Not just the winter, though that first winter nearly broke him, but the silence people gave him in hallways, the way conversation stopped when he walked into a room, the subtle choreography of exclusion that never announced itself directly but was always, always there. He worked night shifts at a restaurant kitchen near Hongdae, scrubbing pots until his hands bled, then taking the last subway back to his dormitory to study until 3 in the morning. His hands were always raw. He kept them wrapped in cloth when he wasn't in the kitchen, unwrapping them only in the lecture hall where he had to write fast and couldn't afford the distraction of pain. It was Sirin who noticed first. She was volunteering at a free clinic near the university, one of those small, underfunded places that existed in the gaps between the private hospital system her father controlled. She had grown up inside that system, watched it from the inside out, seen how it made decisions about who deserved care and who didn't based on numbers in a bank account. She volunteered at the free clinic every Saturday as a small, private act of protest that she had never explained to her father and never intended to. Tare had come in for gauze and antiseptic. That was all. He sat down at the intake desk and began unwrapping his hands with the careful, practiced economy of someone who had done it many times before, and Sirin watched his face remain completely neutral, no flinch, no complaint, no request for sympathy. "How long have they been like this?" she asked. "They're fine," he said. "I just need gauze." "They're not fine." She took his hands gently and examined them the way someone would who knew what she was looking for. "You're a medical student." He looked at her with the measured expression he had learned to use with people who ask too many questions. "Yes." "Then you know these need proper treatment." "I know they need gauze and time," he said. "Which I don't have a lot of." She bandaged his hands properly anyway. She made him wait while she did it, and he didn't argue, and somewhere in that small silence something shifted between them, the way things sometimes shift without announcement, without permission, between two people who are both, in different ways, deeply alone. They fell in love the way people do when they are both hiding from their real lives. They studied together in a corner booth of a 24-hour diner near campus, speaking in a mixture of Korean and English that evolved its own private grammar. He taught her phrases in Yoruba that made her laugh so unexpectedly she'd cover her mouth with both hands. She brought him home-cooked food in containers she pretended were leftovers from a friend's house, not from the professional kitchen in the Baek family residence in Gangnam. He ate everything without asking questions. He told her about his mother, a nurse in Port Harcourt who had raised him alone after his father died from a heart condition they couldn't afford to treat. He said it simply, without dramatizing it, the way people state the facts of their lives when those facts have been carried long enough to become ordinary. That's why cardiology, Sirin said. That's why cardiology, he agreed. She told him about growing up in the Beck household, the size of it, the silence in it, the way her father moved through it like a force of nature that never actually stopped to look at anything. He built a hospital system that saves thousands of people, she said. And I think he's done it without ever once asking how any of those people actually feel. Tare looked at her for a long moment. He sounds like someone who chose power over presence. Yes, she said quietly. That's exactly it. She had never heard it named that clearly before. She fell for him completely after that, not just his mind, which was the sharpest she'd encountered, but his refusal to perform suffering, his stubborn dignity in the face of a city that tried daily to make him feel small. She had grown up surrounded by powerful people. Tare was the first person she'd met who was genuinely strong. They kept it secret because they both understood instinctively what discovery would mean. Tae-suk, Tare's closest friend, the boy from Busan who laughed loudest in the lecture hall and always shared his notes, was the only person who knew, and Tare trusted him the way you trust someone you've eaten ramen with at midnight too many times to count. He should not have. Chairman Baek Dae-jun summoned his daughter on a Tuesday evening. He was seated at the head of the dining table when she arrived, which meant this was not a conversation, it was an audience. A photographer's portfolio was laid open in front of him. She looked at the photographs and felt the floor tilt beneath her. Tare and her. The clinic. The diner. Walking near the Han River. You've been careless, her father said. I've been happy, she said. The silence that followed was the kind that her father used instead of anger, long and dense and designed to make you feel the weight of your own words. You think I don't understand happiness, he said finally. I built everything you've ever lived in so that you could have more choices than I did. This, he placed one finger on a photograph without looking at it, is not a choice. It is an embarrassment. It is a liability. It is the kind of story that ends careers. His and yours. He's going to be one of the best surgeons in the country. He is a foreign student on a scholarship. He is washing dishes at night because his scholarship doesn't cover his expenses. He is one immigration violation away from deportation. He is not in a position to love you, Sirin. And you are not in a position to love someone who will pull you under. You don't know him. I know exactly what he is, Chairman Beck said, and there was something in his voice, not cruelty, but a hardness that had been forged over decades, and I know what you are. And they do not belong in the same sentence. He had already made the arrangements before she arrived. She didn't know that yet. Tare received the message from Tae-suk, come to the office building on Tehran Road tonight. Someone wants to speak with you privately and didn't question it because he had no reason to. Chairman Beck was alone when he arrived. No assistants, no lawyers, no theater. Just a man behind a desk and an envelope on the desk between them. Sit down, the chairman said. Tare Saturday. I'll be direct with you. You're an intelligent man. You'll appreciate directness. Chairman Beck looked at him with the assessing gaze of someone used to pricing things. My daughter has real feelings for you. I understand that. I'm not here to dismiss what you've built with her. I'm here because I've looked at your situation carefully, and I know things you don't. What things? Tare said. Your mother's treatment. The oncology program at Lagos University Teaching Hospital. It's expensive. The funding through your scholarship doesn't cover it, there's a gap. A significant one. He paused. I've been covering it for 3 months through a private arrangement. Anonymously. Tare went very still. I did it, Chairman Beck continued, because I looked at your academic record and I understood that you are the kind of person who deserves to become a doctor. I'm not your enemy. But I am a man who understands consequences. He pushed the envelope forward. Inside that envelope is enough money to fund your remaining years of study, pay for your mother's full treatment, and set you up comfortably in a practice outside Korea when you qualify. And in exchange, Tare said, you leave Seoul. You don't contact my daughter again. You allow her to build the life she is meant to have. The silence stretched between them. And if I refuse? Chairman Beck met his eyes without flinching. Your visa review is scheduled for next week. There's a discrepancy in your employment declaration. The restaurant work was off the books. It could result in deportation. Your mother's anonymous funding ends tonight either way. He paused. I'm not threatening you, Tare. I'm showing you the walls of the room you're already in. Tare stared at the envelope for a long time. He thought about his mother's face. He thought about what it had felt like to sit by his father's bed and understand, at 11 years old, that his father was dying not from the disease but from the cost of treating it. He picked up the envelope. He did not sleep that night. He packed what he owned, which wasn't much: textbooks, a photograph of his mother, the cloth he used to wrap his hands. He wrote Sirin a message 3 times and deleted it each time, because every version of the truth was also a kind of detonation he couldn't bring himself to set off. He left before dawn. At the airport, he didn't look back. He didn't know that Sirin was running through the departures terminal 30 minutes later, breathless, holding something she hadn't yet told him. He didn't know she'd found the pregnancy test that morning, positive, in the bathroom of her apartment. He didn't know she'd called his number and found it already disconnected. He didn't know any of it for 7 years. 7 years is long enough to build a life. It is also long enough to build walls around yourself so efficiently that you forget where the doors used to be. Tare trained in Singapore. He was brilliant and he was driven and he was, his colleagues agreed, privately, unreachable in some fundamental way. He operated with a precision that became something people discussed in surgical circles across Southeast Asia. He published research. He turned down job offers from 4 countries. He did not date seriously. He did not talk about Korea. He became one of the world's foremost specialists in aortic surgery because he chose it the way you choose a place to put everything that has nowhere else to go. In Seoul, Sirin raised a son. Baek Minu was 6 years old and looked so precisely like his father that it was sometimes difficult for Sirin to look at him directly without feeling something crack open in her chest. He had Tare's eyes, that particular quality of watchful intelligence, always observing, always 2 steps ahead. He had Tare's stillness. He had his father's hands. She had told him that his father was a doctor who lived far away. She hadn't said more than that. Minu, in the way of perceptive children, had decided not to ask questions he could sense his mother wasn't ready to answer. Her father had accepted the child in the end, not warmly, not completely, but with the pragmatic love of a man who was incapable of rejecting his own bloodline. Minu called him Harabioji. The chairman, for his part, bought the boy every educational toy that existed and tried, in the only language he knew, to show that he cared. But Chairman Beck had been ignoring his own body for years. The chest pain he explained away as stress. The fainting spell at a board meeting that his assistant was paid to describe as low blood sugar. The blood pressure readings his private physician had been documenting with increasing alarm. He was a man who had spent his career making decisions about other people's health and had exempted himself from the same scrutiny. Then one Thursday morning, during a shareholder presentation, he collapsed. The diagnosis was acute aortic dissection, a catastrophic tear in the wall of the main artery leaving the heart. Without surgery, death was a matter of hours. With surgery, survival depended entirely on the skill of the person holding the instruments. 3 senior surgeons at the hospital reviewed the scans and declined the case. It was too complex. The anatomy was too compromised. One name kept appearing in the consultations. Tare Odili. Singapore General. The man who had pioneered a modified repair technique that had a success rate no one else was matching. The man who had, one of the senior consultants mentioned quietly, trained here in Seoul years ago. Choi Miron, now head of the surgical residency program, took the phone call herself. She had been Tare's friend when he was a student. She had watched what happened to him. She had hated herself for not doing more. She dialed his number. He walked into the consultation room on a Friday afternoon, and Sirin was standing by the window. She heard the door. She turned. The 7 years hit them both simultaneously, like a wave that had been building offshore the entire time. Neither of them spoke for a moment that felt architectural, load-bearing, defining. "Tare," she said. Her voice was completely steady in the way that voices are when the alternative is collapse. "Sirin." He looked at her the way you look at someone when you have rehearsed this moment 10,000 times and none of the rehearsals prepared you for the actual weight of the real thing. A small voice came from the corner of the room. "Mom." "Who is that?" Minu had been sitting on a chair, reading, the way his father used to study, completely still, completely absorbed. He looked up now with Tare's exact eyes, and Tare turned toward the sound, and the room seemed to slow down, time turning viscous around that one moment. The boy tilted his head. "Why does he look like me?" Sirin's hand went to her mouth. Tare turned to look at her. She was crying silently, the tears falling without any change in her expression, the way someone cries when they have run out of ways to stop it. "Sirin," he said, very quietly. "Is he?" "Yes," she whispered. "His name is Minu. He's 6. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the most full silence either of them had ever stood inside. Miron found him an hour later, standing alone in the hospital stairwell, his back against the wall, his eyes closed. "You knew," he said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was just the truth." "I found out when Minu was 2 months old," Miron said. "Sirin told me. I kept it because she asked me to. And because I thought." She stopped. "There's no good version of what I thought." "Taisuk," he said. He told the chairman. He was paid well for it. He has a department head position now at Beck Medical Group. Tare opened his eyes and looked at the concrete wall across from him. The chairman threatened deportation. "He paid for my mother's treatment as leverage. He handed me an envelope and told me to disappear." He paused. "What I didn't know, what I've been thinking about for the last hour, is that he's been funding her treatment ever since. Anonymously. Even after I left." Miron said nothing. "He paid me to leave," Tare said. "And then he kept paying for her care anyway. For 7 years. He's not simple," Miron said carefully. "No," Tare agreed. "He's not." He pushed off the wall. "Where's the patient?" "Tare." "He's dying, Miron. And the only thing I know how to do right now is the one thing I'm actually good at." He moved toward the stairwell door. "Get the OR ready." Minu found him before the surgery. He appeared in the corridor outside the changing rooms with the unannounced directness of a child who has decided something. He stood in front of Tare and looked up at him with composed, evaluating eyes. "Are you going to save my grandfather?" Minu asked. Tare crouched down to the boy's level. He looked at his son's face, this small, serious, living consequence of everything, and felt something in his chest that had been locked for 7 years begin, very slowly, to open. "I'm going to try," he said. "Trying isn't the same as doing," Minu said. "Mom always says that?" Tare almost smiled. "She's right. She always was." Minu considered him for a moment. "Will you come back after? Or will you leave again?" The question landed with the perfect cruelty that only honest children can deliver. "I'm not going anywhere," Tare said. He meant it in a way he hadn't meant anything in a very long time. Minu gave a small nod, the nod of someone who has filed the information for later verification, and walked back toward the waiting area. The surgery took 14 hours. Outside, rain moved across Seoul in heavy grey sheets. Sirin sat in the waiting room and did not move. Miron brought her coffee she didn't drink. Minu fell asleep against her shoulder around midnight, and she held him and stared at the OR indicator light and waited. Inside, Tare worked. He worked the way he always worked, with the absolute, consuming focus that left no room for anything else. But underneath it, deeper than technique, something had shifted. He was repairing the aorta of the man who had destroyed his life. He was also repairing the aorta of the man who had paid for his mother's survival for 7 years. He was operating on a man who had made terrible choices from a place of genuine, if catastrophically expressed, love. He held the chairman's life in his hands and chose, without drama, to keep it. When Tare walked out of the OR at nearly 4 a.m, Sirin was on her feet before the doors had finished opening. She read his face, she had always been able to read his face, and let out a breath so long it seemed to empty her completely. "He's alive," Tare said. "Recovery will take weeks. But he's alive." She walked toward him and stopped 2 feet away, close enough to speak quietly. "I looked for you," she said. "After you left. I tried everything I had." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "I didn't know about Minu. I need you to know that. If I had known." "I know," she said. "I know you would have stayed. I want you to know something else." His voice was low but certain. "What your father did, what Tae-suk did, I'm angry. I'm going to be angry for a long time. But I'm not leaving. Not again." He looked over her shoulder to where Minu was still asleep on a chair, one hand tucked under his cheek. "Not now." Chairman Beck woke 3 days later. He was diminished in the way that the very powerful are diminished by illness, suddenly, visibly mortal, the performance of authority stripped away by tubes and monitors and the simple fact of a hospital gown. Tare came to his bedside because Sirin asked him to, and also because he had decided that the only way forward was through. The chairman looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then, slowly, with the carefulness of a man choosing words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. "I spent my whole life protecting my family," he said. "Building walls. Making decisions. Removing risks." He stopped. His voice, usually the instrument of authority, was rough and thin. "I thought I was holding everything together. I didn't understand." Another stop. "I became the thing that broke it." Tare sat in the chair beside the bed. He didn't offer forgiveness because forgiveness wasn't something you could hand over like a document. It was something that would take time, real time, earned slowly. "You paid for my mother's care," Tare said. "Even after I was gone." "It was the least I could do," Chairman Beck said. "It was also the most I knew how to do." He looked at the ceiling. "She raised someone remarkable. I should have seen that sooner." "You saw it," Tare said. "You told me as much the night you paid me to leave." The old man closed his eyes. "Yes. I did see it. And I was afraid of it." He paused. A man who has spent his life in control is terrified by the one thing he can't control. "What's that?" "The fact that his daughter was happy," Chairman Beck said quietly. "And he was the reason she stopped being. Nothing was fixed in a day. Trust, once collapsed, is rebuilt in the way that fractures heal, slowly, from the inside out, invisible for a long time before it shows." Tare began spending evenings with Minu. They were awkward at first in the way that important things are always awkward at first, too much weight in the room, both of them trying not to try too hard. But Minu had his father's directness, and one evening over a bowl of ramen he simply said, "Are you going to be my dad now?" And Tare said, "I already am. I just didn't know it until now." And Minu nodded once, decisively, and went back to his food. Sirin and Tare moved toward each other the way glaciers move, slowly, with enormous force, reshaping the landscape as they went. There was too much history for easy words. They spoke in small, careful increments. They had dinner together. They walked along the Han River in the early morning, Minu running ahead, and Tare reached out without thinking and took her hand, and she let him, and neither of them said anything about it. Tae-suk called once. Tare let the call go. He wasn't ready for that yet. He wasn't sure he would ever be ready. But he also wasn't going to carry it forever. That was a door he'd decide about later. What he knew, what he carried home with him at the end of each day, settling into the certainty of it the way you settle into your own bones, was that he had come back to Seoul to save a life. He had saved it. And in the doing of it, something had been returned to him that he hadn't realized was missing, the knowledge that he could put down the weight he'd been carrying since a winter morning in an airport 7 years ago, when he had walked away from everything that mattered without knowing that everything was more than he knew. The rich Korean family had paid him to disappear. What they hadn't counted on was what he would become in the dark. And what none of them had understood, not the chairman, not Tae-suk, not even Serin in her most hopeful moments, was that some people cannot be bought out of their own story. They can only be delayed. Tare Odili was never gone. He was always just becoming the man they would one day desperately need. If this story moved you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment below and tell us, would you have saved him? Share this with someone who needs to hear it today.